Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Talk Kashrus, presented by the Kashrus Awareness Project in conjunction with Torah Anytime. Today we are joined by Rabbi Nochum Rabinowitz, Senior Rabbinic Coordinator with the OU and Rav of the Monastricha Beis Medrash in Flatbush. Thank you, Rabbi Rabinowitz, for being here.
Thank you so much for graciously having me.
Many people are familiar with the reliable hashgachas here in the United States. People are comfortable at home. They know what they use. They know perhaps what they don't use. They have people to call. I think when traveling abroad, the challenge of kashrus is just magnified so much. And people are very often unaware, and maybe they make assumptions or they stop making phone calls. They're not really sure what to do. We hear this from many people. I'm not talking about when you go to Eretz Yisrael. Over there, people are maybe perhaps more familiar, but especially when you go to Europe. But based on your experience, could you give us some pointers when someone is traveling overseas, wherever it may be? What should they look for, and what guidance could you give them?
Okay, I think here in the U.S. on some level we're spoiled because there's a history of kashrus in the United States. There are many stories about 100+ years ago in the United States where all kinds of scandals, unfortunately, that went on. Kashrus was in the hands of individuals. It wasn't in the hands of large organizations, with directors of groups of rabbanim who regulated the way kashrus worked. And there were many problems. What I find sometimes is that we're blessed here in the United States, but not just blessed because of, living in this free country, a country which has been relatively tolerant to Jews generally and to kashrus needs more specifically. But I think the kashrus consumer, I always feel that an educated kashrus consumer is the kashrus agency's best advocate. Mm-hmm. Because when the consumer want and demand high levels of kashrus, then the kashrus agencies can translate those demands into real solid standards of kashrus in the field. Here in the United States, we have large organizations, nonprofit organizations that operate with a level of transparency and also with a level, to some extent, of uniformity. And some of that I'll give credit to. There's an organization called ACO, which
I was about to say, ACO gets a lot of credit
absolutely
for bringing together kashrus agencies.
Right. So the Association of Kashrus Agencies, Rabbi Shalom Fishbein from Chicago, is the head of that organization. There's information which is shared, and the agencies therefore try to work in a uniform fashion, but they also work with a great deal of transparency because the professionals talk to one another. Mm. And if something happens in one agency or in one hashgacha, it's often information which is shared with others. So as a result, you can get this type of a uniformity. There's no complete uniformity in the world, right, but there's certain standards and demands which we're able to, and that's why you can walk into a VAD restaurant, or you can go to a caterer in a particular location, or you can pick up a product off a store shelf and feel a level of comfort. Yes, there are different standards, there are different chumras that some do or would not apply, but it's serious kashrus. These are serious people, professionals, who are doing the job the way it should be done. When you travel, so there's a whole different set of circumstances. You mentioned Europe. So Europe is interesting. Europe is smaller communities, but not just that they're smaller in population, but for some reason the demands of the kosher consumer in such locations are not received as well by the companies. They don't feel that need. For example, it's very hard to find products with kosher symbols unless you're buying specialty products, either imported from the US or from Israel, which are sold in some kosher grocery store.
That's interesting.
You will not find, as you travel through Europe, if there's very few.
Is it simply because the market is not big enough to make it financially beneficial for the companies? Is that what it is?
It's hard to tell. The OU, for example, certifies over 2,000 plants in Europe. But the reason that we're certifying those companies is because they sell to the US or they sell to Israel. Mm-hmm. It's not so much for domestic consumption. And even when we try to do this as a service to the European population, the Jewish population, we're certifying your product anyway.
Right.
We're in your plant anyway. The products are made under kosher conditions. Why don't you put the symbol
Right.
on the products sold in Europe? And for some reason, it's just not accepted. It's not done.
That's interesting.
And but again, here as well, it's not something we should take for granted.
Right.
I think it's because people are persistent and people said, we want kosher and we want to be able to get those products. And something as minor as picking up a phone and calling a consumer hotline of a company to complain if a product is not kosher that could be kosher, or to complain if there's a mistake, that tells there's not that many people that actually call these lines or send emails.
Wow.
And the more that people do that, the more that they get feedback from the consumer, the more likely these manufacturers are going to try to
Right.
meet the needs of the kosher consumer.
I wonder if the attitude in Europe, I'm just, not the historian, but if it's still a residue of the anti-Semitism from World War II and so on, and people still are subjected to a lot of the dislike towards the Jewish community in Greater Europe. I wonder if that's related at all, but very often it comes down to the dollar. That's what we think,
Right.
and at the end of the day, in the United States, the kosher market is a tremendous market, and as you said, we're spoiled here.
Right, and I think it was in 1923 that the OU started its first hashgacha, which was the Heinz Company, the H.G. Heinz Company in Pittsburgh. And what was the motivation of a large manufacturer like that? I think it was a women's league of the OU that solicited the company and said, as what was happening at that time was products that had often been made in the home were slowly moving into factories. And they said, we keep kosher, we want to use your product, but we'll only use your product if it becomes kosher. And that sort of started something, and company after company after company, till there are many products that they wouldn't dream to bring to market unless it was kosher.
But these are important lessons where you're saying, first of all, about the educated consumer is the greatest advocate, which is really what this whole Kashrus awareness project, Let's Talk Kashrus, is built on. The wonderful people who came together to create this project is to educate the consumer so that they could be an advocate. That's number one. And number two, I'm learning from you, is that never underestimate your power as a consumer in expressing your needs, desires, and wants to the various companies. You never realize how far that could go. So that's also a very, very important lesson.
I think statistically, when they look at a phone call or an email or whatever other method of communication that's used, you feel I'm just one person, but you may be one out of 100 people that contact them. That's significant. That's 1%. Maybe two people call. And sometimes, I think it was a number of years ago, the Stella D'Oro company decided that I think they call it the Streimel cookie.
Streimel cookie, of course.
Right, that cookie which had a par of chocolate filling. And they decided it wasn't worth their while to continue to get the special par of a filling. They'll go with a milchika filling. And there was such an outcry, and they quickly changed their minds and they went back to making it parv. But that's why, whether it's the Nabiscos of the world or the Cheerios of the world, the General Mills and these companies, we're not that many people, but we're vocal, and we must remain like that. We have to. If we're not vocal, it's something that we shouldn't lose what we have.
So when someone does go to Europe, what should one look for, and how does one obtain a list of reliable certifications? Or, like you said, there may be kosher products without the symbol on it. How do you determine
I
what
think
is
that there's
kosher?
another important distinction. Many of the kashrus agencies in Europe provide lists of products that they recommend. And I think it's important not to confuse recommended products with certified products. You have to realize any product that has a kosher symbol from a reputable kosher agency, what's behind that? Number one, there's a registered trademark that they're using which belongs to the kashrus agency. They've signed a legal document, a legal agreement with the organization that restricts the ingredients that they use in the product, the manufacturing practices of the product, and the way and how they use the symbol on the product. When you don't have, when you're absent all those, the fact that someone made a phone call to a company and, did some investigation, it's a different, maybe in Europe that's what they have to rely on. They don't have other choices. And they recommend products, and I certainly don't fault, Rabbanim have responsibilities to their communities. They have to make sure that the communities have what to eat. And the local people, that's what they have. At the same time, when we're traveling, the fact that we're traveling doesn't mean that we should compromise our standards. If we're accustomed to certain standards, maybe we don't have the same variety that we would have when we're in the United States. Maybe we don't have the same reach that we would have. But we have to be vigilant. And in terms of who to ask, it's interesting. Some Rabbanim are familiar; they know the Kashrus scene, but other Rabbanim are not as familiar. You need people who really understand the professionals in the industry that interact with different agencies and different standards. And it's nobody likes to talk negatively about another hashgacha, but when you speak to people who are more in the know, it's easier to get good information about what it meets the standards. It's really not to have to compromise oneself to say I'm on vacation, so therefore I'll take a secondary level, secondary product. That's sure would spoil the vacation.
Well, we appreciate everything that you've done, and Rabbanim Machshirim like yourself, who have made it so comfortable for us here in the United States with a plethora of products, supermarkets that are stocked to the gills with all different types of items. And definitely when you travel, you start appreciating what you have at home.
Oh yeah, and we in Kashrus are familiar, not just because we're involved in Kashrus, because we do travel.
Exactly.
We go in all kinds of places and we see the limitations, and we see, many times it means packing food, packing a canned food or whatever it may be. And I would say, the credit, obviously the people who are Ma'aseh Nefesh, the people who are out in the field, the real mashgichim are the real warriors for Kashrus, but it's only the cooperation of the tzibur, the public, that demand Kashrus at the highest standards that make this happen.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you.